Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all of our affiliates, all of our members, our guests. We really hope that you've had a wonderful day thus far. Baie welkom aan al ons lede en al ons vriende en gaste wat allemaal ingeskakel is. I'm with our president, Mr. Pierre van Verkeil, and we will now host TRANSNET. Unfortunately, the group CEO, Portia Darbe, is not available for this time slot, but we have Dr. Andrew Shaw. He is the Group Chief of Strategy and Planning from TRANSNET, who will do a presentation. Now, before he starts, I just want to express our sincerest appreciation for all the work that TRANSNET has done to assist farmers thus far. During the lockdown period, we had a range of issues in terms of harbour access, the transporting of abnormal loads, as well as the transport of diesel via the diesel pipeline. But TRANSNET, I really want to thank Portia Darbe, also Michelle Phillips, for all the work that you have done thus far to assist us and to assist this sector. We are indeed very, very grateful. Pierre, any introductory comments from your side?
Yes, from my side, I'd like to say, that TRANSNET and transport and logistics is so important in agriculture that we have to make it more efficient, and we can do that with the help of TRANSNET on grains, etc., as well as inputs, because at the end of the day, the whole value chain impacts on the consumer, and we'll have to do it as efficiently as possible. I believe that TRANSNET's got a big role to play in this, and I look forward to the discussion and questions that we can pose to see whether we can get this whole logistics issue in agriculture more efficient.
Andrew, over to you and welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to present are you able to hear me?
Yes, Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I had a blockage there in the sound, and so I thought maybe that I wasn't audible.
It's not working.
Yeah, unfortunately, Andrew.
Let me. I'm not sure if.
That's not working.
Andrew, you must just continue. We hear you quite clearly.
He's not speaking.
Okay, I think we've got a problem on Andrew's side in terms of connectivity. And Pierre, while we wait for Andrew, let's us have a quick, maybe just a short discussion in terms of the role of TRANSNET in terms of the bigger picture. I know we've had many discussions with TRANSNET for the past few months, and that was quite helpful. Right at the start of the lockdown, we had complaints from John Deere, from other companies who had quite a battle with offloading their tractors and all kinds of other equipment. And with the help of TRANSNET, we had those boats returned. They were all on the way to Singapore, and they all returned back to South Africa, and we could then offload it. With the help of the Minister of Transport, we were then able to open the office that provides the permits for abnormal loads, so that those tractors and combine harvesters could be transported from the harbour to the areas where it was required to do harvesting. And then we also had quite an issue with the diesel pipeline, and with the help of our Centre of Excellence for Safety, they then assisted also to ensure that we safeguard that pipeline, because it crossed quite a lot of farms. And at the end of the day, we could help the farmers to resolve the issue with diesel shortages and things like that. So overall, I think this relationship with Transnet, we really treasure it. But perhaps any comments from your side, Pierre, and what the other needs are in terms of, what Transnet can do for the sector to improve transport efficiencies, etc.
Well, Christo, yes, you referred to the harbours. That's part of the story, but the fact of the matter is that the railways always played a very big role in the transport of grains, seeing that we export a lot of grain since a few years ago. Now, this actually came to a stop, and we moved a lot of the transport by road. Our roads in South Africa are finding it very difficult to cope with all the transport. And if we look at the efficiencies of transport, it's obviously the better way is to go by rail. Now, I would like Andrew just to give us an idea whether the railways and rail, because the cost of transporting by rail is much cheaper than doing it by road, whether this will all, in future, whether there will be an opportunity to again transport the bulk of our summer grains by rail. If you look at what happens in the transport business and logistics and the cost thereof, I'm of the opinion that it's still the most cost-efficient manner of transporting grains. If Andrew can give us some idea whether the Transnet has any plans as far as that is concerned, or whether this is something of the past and that the transport has actually privatized to such an extent that it's different transport companies that's going to do most of the transporting by road, and that Transnet is going to be important to agriculture as far as the export harbours are concerned, and not so much the railway side of it, because I think this is a burning question to a great extent, because also foreign fertilizers, inputs, everything is done by road nowadays, and where a couple of years ago, about 25 years ago, this was mostly done by way of the railways and transport on rail. Whether this is something that is a business opportunity for Transnet now, or whether this was also always done at a loss, is something that we don't know. But from an agricultural point of view, common sense tells us that this is actually the way that it should go, because we do not actually factor in the cost of the hammering that the roads are taking, with all the big trucks and everything that has to transport all the inputs as well as the produce from for that farmers produce, especially for export purposes.
Thank you, Pierre. I think we've got Andrew back. Andrew, over to you.
No.
Thank you very much to both of you. I hope this time I'm a little more audible and you can see the presentation.
Go ahead, Andrew. You're quite audible. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm presenting on behalf of
Andrew, can you hear us? Okay. Now, I think one of the big issues, Pierre, was that during the time of the strict lockdown, Transnet was quite open. They had an open door policy. We could interact with them. I remember there was at one stage when Agri-Western Cape phoned me and said they've got a big issue in the harbour with the offloading of chemicals that must be used to prepare the lands for the winter grain season. And through our interaction with Transnet, those boats were offloaded. Chemicals were then transported, offloaded, transported, and it could then be used to prepare, for the winter grain seasons. So that's the kind of level of interaction that we really appreciate We've also seen a lot of work being done to assist the wine industry in terms of exporting wine to international destinations. But I think given the fact that we need to grow the economy, given the fact that agriculture, there's a huge potential for further growth, and especially on the export side. The bigger question is whether our harbors can handle imports and more so exports. Perhaps your comments around that?
Yeah, well, Christo, firstly, we must say thank you very much for the assistance we received from Transnet to be able to assist farmers and to get the produce on the ships and the inputs off the ships and out of the harbors and into the harbors and so on. The fact that we could collaborate so closely and do this in a manner that was very efficient made things much easier. But we're looking at a growing agricultural economy, and the demands for this is going to become more and more. So just as an example, we're looking at the export that's happened in the last few months, export of live sheep from the East London Harbour. There's going to be opportunities even from the Port Elizabeth Harbour and from Kucha, etc., to be able to service our farmers, our new farmers, especially those farmers in the communal areas, for new markets in the Middle East and so forth. So the opportunities are there. Fact of the matter is that Transnet is a very, very important link in the chain of the agricultural supply chain. And we have to understand that we will be dependent on rail as well as harbors forever, I suppose, because as we produce more, we'll have to export more. And to export more, we're going to have efficient logistics systems and be able to assist farmers, especially if we look at fresh produce, fruit, vegetables, etc., that go for export, that we keep the cold chain going, that we have quality products delivered on the other side, and make it possible for everybody to make a better living and create markets for the new farmers of South Africa as well as everybody else. Our growing population makes this a very important issue, and we will have to collaborate closely with Transnet as well as other logistic companies if we have to be able to see that this is as efficient and cost effective as possible.
Thanks, Pierre. I think we've got Andrew back. Andrew, I already see a number of questions here, but we give you the opportunity to fire away.
Okay, my apologies. The technology is really challenging. We're learning to live in a new world. If I could ask if they could, there we go. There's the question that comes up. So firstly, let me just start by saying I'm presenting on behalf of Portia Darby, who's the Group CEO of Transnet. We're part of a new management team. We have a focus on a changed trajectory for Transnet and much greater alliance to supporting the economy of South Africa going forward. And I will talk to that as we go into the presentation. If I could ask if we could jump to the next slide, which deals with the contents. And I'll just talk you quickly through the items that I wanted to share. The first element of what is there is just a brief introduction, who we are, an overview of the agricultural economy, at least as we see it, challenges experienced during lockdown, which had an impact on the agribusiness, how Transnet views the agricultural economy and our role there, and then lastly, just some opportunity for cost-effective logistics solutions going forward. If we could go to the next slide, and the one thereafter, just Transnet is based on 6 key business areas: Transnet Freight Rail, Transnet Engineering, Transnet Ports Authority, and Transnet Port Terminals, which operate the ports collectively, essentially under the guidance of the National Ports Act, and that's why there's a separation there between port infrastructure and port operations. Transnet Pipelines, which operates the fuel and to a lesser extent gas pipelines within South Africa. And then Transnet Property, which has access to considerable range of property that we would like to leverage as new management and effective use of going forward. I guess the business that Agri is interested in is partly the terminals and how we're able to export, but also the role that Transnet Freight Rail can play. We have an extensive network. We largely have been effective in the bulk commodity space, and we've struggled a little more in spaces like agriculture, industrial products, etc., which are more complex and require logistics solutions. So going forward, we see the role of Transnet Freight Rail playing hopefully a more aligned a role in trying to drive out further expansion and export in agriculture. If we can go to the next slide. These are our key pillars, and this is really what Portia is driving. So she would spend a lot of time talking very enthusiastically about this slide. But from a strategy perspective, my key role and function is to drive some of these key initiatives. So let me just go through them quickly. We would like to be and are definitely driving a much closer association with the customer. We want to understand what the customer needs, where we're failing, and what we can do to enhance our alignment to the customer service needs out there in the market. That's not an easy task. Customers are very demanding. They're also very differential. As in your own industry, there's many customers geographically spread with lots of different logistics nuances in terms of the services that they're looking for. The second area we want to focus on is people. We would like to improve our people and processes so that we drive much more effective operations and the delivery of operations much more aligned to the customer. Again, this is challenging to a large extent. We've inherited the people that we have within the organization. There are many good people. What we're trying to do is drive out a more effective business proposition around the people that we have in the business. Asset utilization is an area that I think has, in the last few years within Transnet, has not been sufficient of a focus. So from my perspective, in terms of planning assets and expenditure on assets, we would like to be more targeted. We would like to make better use of assets, and we certainly would like to involve the private sector more effectively in the use of assets. The last that are there that are just separated now that see this, there we go, is safety. We have had a reduction in safety over the last 1 or 2 years, and we'd like to reinvigorate the emphasis on safety. And the last area is cost control. Now, cost control is critical for us as we go into a post-COVID world for a few reasons. One of them is that been downgraded, as have all SOEs and as the sovereign government. So it's more difficult and more costly for us to raise debt. We have a lot of debt, and we've also gone, like many businesses in the COVID environment, we've seen declining revenue. So we have to be much more effective in terms of how we run and manage the business. If we can jump to the next. In terms of the economy, and as we see this, if we look at the next slide, you will see our kind of view of where the agricultural economy is. In a way, this slide is quite kind to us. It sort of indicates that South Africa faces a post-COVID impact of GDP of around -8%. The reality of what we're picking up from some of the banking analysts is that actually South Africa is far worse than that number. But what is clear about this is some of our trading partners have not been as negatively impacted. And in the agricultural commodity space are still demanding considerable product. Interestingly, in many mining commodity areas, we see the same trend. We see decline in some commodity space, especially in fossil fuels, liquid fuel, and coal. But we see a slight uptick in the demand for things like manganese, chrome, etc. So, in a certain sense, while the global economy is seeing a downturn, there are some signs that there's still some stability within the overall economy from our perspective. So we're grateful for that because it helps our business through this difficult time. If we can go to the next slide. Here what we identify is South Africa's top export destinations, and you will see the growth of China that has really has begun to dominate South Africa, both in terms of commodity exports, but also as I think the agricultural commodity or agricultural sector has experienced, is that demand from Southeast Asia is probably greater than in other parts of the world. So we're increasingly looking east, and we will talk a little bit about where Transnet is focused to try and be more effective in reaching through maritime trade much more cost effectively that region or that part of the world. If we can go to the next slide. Here, what we identify is the quite considerable growth in agricultural commodities, certainly up until the 2020 period. And so we need to align behind this, and this really represents a considerable opportunity for the national economy. On the right-hand side, what you do see is things that are traditionally strong in the agricultural commodity sector, such as sugarcane, have actually started to decline. And as you will see on the next slide, the same is true in the forestry sector. Now, these were traditionally strong areas for Transnet. Part of this is the reduction in paper demand globally. Part of this is about competitors from Brazil in both sugar and forestry. And so from a perspective of agriculture, what we are seeing is shifts and changes in the dynamics of agricultural trade. What it does create is more complexity around the needs of agriculture, because instead of being focused on what we would regard as the more commodity stockpile type agricultural export. So timber we would generally stockpile and we would export through multi-purpose terminals in our ports. We would export as bulk. We are starting to see a shift towards the need for fresh produce, much higher speed requirements, reefer container requirements in order to export volumes of fresh product out of South Africa. If we can go to the next slide. I guess everybody's aware of this, but this sort of puts things into perspective and maybe illustrates the importance of the agricultural sector. But if you take the second quarter, which is really the period at which lockdown was at its most significant, what you can see is the decline in the various sectors of the economy. So construction really declined significantly, partly as a consequence of lack of contracts out in the market, but also as a consequence of the fact that COVID restricted the ability to work on site. And the same is true in manufacturing and so on. One of the areas that saw actually quite a significant fall off was mining. That's third up from the bottom. And so while we have seen a big return back in the mining sector, it really, during the COVID period, saw a significant decline. This was a consequence, I think, of the miners, but also Transnet, as we'll talk to later, in the early parts of lockdown, had a significant infection rate in some parts of the businesses. We had to institute priority freight system, which government put on us through regulation, which meant that certain freight had to be prioritized. And we also started from that. I think through the help of working with sectors such as yourself, we were able to actually get back on track quite. And again, I'll talk to that. But maybe the key point about this slide is if you look at the only growth sector, you will see it is agriculture. Agriculture really sustained growth through this very significant declining period. So from the diversity of an economy perspective, it's very clear that agriculture shows itself to be a key driver for growth. I think in our Business for SA engagements, and we know that these same engagements have happened through the presidency, is there's a key push to make agriculture a much greater or more focused sector going forward because of its ability to actually generate both jobs and real GDP growth. If I can go to the next slide. So some of the challenges we expect here is the mobility of people and freight during lockdown was very constrained. We operate a national business, so we are quite used to having people moving across provincial boundaries just to operate the railway network. For example, we do far more kilometers we do by locomotive just to get drivers correctly positioned across the railway network. It's just the nature of how we operate. The same is true within the ports. And so our challenges during the early part of lockdown were to operate within a much more constrained environment, to create social distance ports, to walk through the terminals, both container terminals as well as the fresh produce terminals. You will know that people work very closely together in those terminals, both in the operating as well as on the equipment in the crane centers and so on. So to social distancing and sanitization and all that short space of time was very, very challenges. So as a consequence, we had a lot of blockages in the ports in the early days and along the railway lines. Governments instituted, and it wasn't only a South African phenomenon, it was done globally, is this 3-level prioritization of product. So priority 1 freight was things like medical products, medical goods, essential commodities, foods, etc. The challenge with those priorities is that nobody had actually allocated those priorities to the different freight types that we saw within the market. So the challenge with that was that we had to reallocate priorities to those. And if the shipping lines had not assisted us, we would have struggled much more significantly. What did happen as a consequence is things like priority 3 freight. Certain logistics providers were unable to pick up from the harbors because they themselves were in lockdown and had restrictions. So we had a build-up within the container stacks of lower order priority freight in the early part of lockdown that we just could not, which created blockages and big challenges for us in terms of how we got the ports back on track. So you mentioned Michelle early in those days. Now she's moved from Transnet port terminals to the pipeline business, but she was parts of lockdown to try and manage that. Then a last area, which I don't know to what extent your industry has felt, but you can see it in the news, and this is the fact that vandalism increased dramatically during the lockdown period and has sustained this increase. There are incidents. At one point, we had 30 incidents a day on the pipeline around attempted theft or vandalism or theft of diesel, and that created a choke point around particularly diesel during that lockdown period. So although the economy was demanding less product, we understand that the agricultural sector was struggling to deal with harvest periods because of shortages of diesel. We've instituted significant security measures on the pipeline to rectify this particular problem. But what we have found in alliance with our other partner, PRASA, is that the levels of vandalism and theft of items for cash, which are mostly metals, has just increased dramatically. And I think this is probably a reflection of the desperation of very poor people within South Africa as a consequence of COVID. So we're faced with a big challenge here, and we're working very hard. In fact, in the farming community, some of the key feedback of disruption on the railway line system comes from farmers reporting theft or vandalism of items on our asset base. If we can move to the next slide. How does Transnet view the agricultural economy? We come from a period pre-95 where agriculture was very different from what it is now. And in a way, I guess the regulated environment in pre-95 tried to protect certain marginal farmers and maybe even restricted growth in the agricultural space, which we've now seen the benefit of opening up. But what it did do is it created aggregation for Transnet, and it also protected Transnet from very active road freight competition. In the period 1995, what I think Transnet has been challenged by in road freight, it increased dramatically. Geographically, agriculture is dispersed across a range of regions, often without direct rail access. So we would like to be shifting towards more of an aggregated type model, which is shown on the far right-hand side to grow this business. We need to manage it more effectively. We need to be putting more effective supply chain solutions in place to do that. And we also need to be opening up our network. So we would like to see players in the what we refer to as a branch line network, and there was an attempt to concession out branch lines going forward. We are opening up the branch lines in a more open way. It's a key part of our strategy drive. We also would like to offer the capability of the private sector to play a more important role in some of our ports and terminals, both in respect of agriculture and other products, and potentially also to begin to own assets on our network where there's value in doing that. So we know in the chemical space, for example, users of chemical products have very specific needs. They often use our rolling stock as storage. They are actively pursuing ownership of assets in those markets. So we are slowly trying to shift to a more efficient model, but a more open model, which allows greater access of our competitors, but also our customers into our network. We will, in a sort of selective and structured way, where we see it makes sense, do that. So we can talk to the detail of that as we go forward. If I can go to the next slide. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but maybe what we can say is that we see three key areas of growth in our economy: fruit, grain, and timber. Now, grain and timber are areas where actually we've retracted, and I think Transnet it should be very honest with itself. There's partly its poor service in the last 5 to 10 years has been a key contributor to that. What we would like to do is work with industry in a way where we can actually refocus our alignment to grain and timber, and also use the branch line network more effectively to collect and aggregate some of these products. Fruit, which is one of the fastest growing products, as you know, for agricultural export, is a key target focus for us, largely because we need to support this from a national economic perspective. But it has very specific and very challenging logistics requirements. There we need to make sure we've got expanded reefer points and so on, and we'll talk to some interesting technologies. We would like to talk to Agri, whether there are consolidation points that we can manage around fruit that would help us rail reefers into the ports more rapidly, and how we could set that service up. Part of the challenge, and we have to be honest about this, is that the harvesting season for all these products, but particularly for fruit, is relatively short, an asset that we have to use over the whole year, and we can't really keep it lying idle for the intervening period. So how do we manage that? And that's a question mark that we need to cover. If I can go to the next slide. Just in terms of driving out cost-effective logistics solutions, if we can jump to the next slide. The agricultural supply chain, particularly around cold storage, is complex. And having worked in some of these sectors prior to joining Transnet, is that it's become more complex and more demanding over time, and the quality requirements from customers, particularly in the global environment, has become more onerous. So this makes it more and more difficult for us, not only to compete, to meet expectations that we have from agricultural aggregators, can call them that, and from the end customers. So we need to redesign our model in such a way that we can meet these needs more effectively, and we need to work more closely with as a key stakeholder group. If we can jump to the next slide. Some interesting sort of intermodal technology solutions that are coming up are reefers which are not owned by the main shipping lines. Most reefers that we deal with at our reefer points, whether for agriculture or for other products, quite often fish and meat, are owned by Maersk and some of the other players. Now the question is there an opportunity for us to be more adaptable about the asset bases that we use in such a way to meet your needs more effectively? And the question, I suppose, is there some value in you owning some of these assets so that they can be used directly within the agricultural harvesting space, and then used to consolidate and get fruit to market, or get product to market, should I say, as rapidly as possible. Some of these products can be used as reefers, so they can be connected to reefer points, plug points, both in our terminals and the container shipping lines. And some of them can be used as containers directly without any cold storage requirements. So there's an opportunity for both of those going forward. If I can jump to the next slide. Maybe just on this slide to say that it should be understood that through our container through our container facilities at the ports, where most agricultural product is still moved through, at the port of Durban, we have about 2.4 million container moves per annum, and the majority, as shown in the brown block on the top left, is moved by road, and only a small portion of that is moved by rail, and that's mostly on what we call the NATCOR corridor, which is the corridor from Durban to Gauteng. We would like to increase that 300 odd TEUs up to 520 by expanding the effectiveness and efficiency of the NatCor corridor, opening up some of the terminals inland, and providing those as aggregation points where we can consolidate traffic before taking it down to the port of Durban. Now, some of that aggregation would be in Gauteng, and so it wouldn't always be directly accessible for a lot of farming communities. But the reality is that's where our main supply chains lie at this point. We can expand some of that out, but the challenge with expanding the rail network out to deal with small volumes is that quite often we just can't meet the performance requirements of being able to turn these around fast enough for either manufactured or for fresh produce commodities such as in agriculture. If you look at the bottom, you'll also see that there's this global trend, and I did say at the beginning I wanted to talk to it. You'll see that the number of TEUs through the terminals has grown, as shown by those grey blocks, but the number of vessels calling has declined in the port of Durban. And what this is a reflection of is that the vessel sizes are increasing. We actually want to drive out a program of port investment which actually enhances the bigger vessels, because what we've seen competitively in other parts of the world is that the more larger vessels you can get calling at the port, the more you can focus on reducing the unit cost price of container tariffs for the shipping lines from us to our main ports of destination. So at the moment, it costs more for us to get a container from South Africa to China than it does from Europe to China, even although we're about half the distance. If we can focus on being more productive and enhancing the trade of scheduled vessels of larger sizes, we believe that the pricing of those containers will come down. So that's an active strategy process that we're driving. And it's explained a little bit in the next slide, which shows two things, I guess. One of them is the focus. So if we can shift to the next slide, the focus on shifting moving towards larger vessels, but also beginning to focus much more on the east than our traditional export focus on the west. A lot of our both manufactured imports are east orientated now, and that has been growing. So the shift from Western markets, North America and Europe, although still strong, has shifted east. And that's both from an import perspective, in other words, our manufactured products, but also as we manufacture more and as we have agricultural exports being exported more, we see the east is growing quite dramatically. Another trend that we've noticed in agricultural products is that they now contribute in the order of about 23 or 24% to manufactured commodities in South Africa. So agriculture is now becoming a key input into the manufactured space, and that's largely through packaged foods, processed foods, etc., and the export of some of those to destinations in both east and west. So the nature of agriculture and how it feeds our domestic economy is also changing. I think this is the last slide, but maybe if I could shift to the next slide, there is possibly a conclusion. Yeah, just some key points to raise. Clearly, the customer needs in the bottom left of the slides have changed quite dramatically over time. More challenging, more focused on fresh product, massive growth in areas like citrus and fruits, etc. The challenges for us are that we are still constrained by the challenges of Transnet's historical challenges to delivery. We can fix some of that, but we would never be able to compete with road freight providers in terms of performance of getting product to market or getting it to hub. We would ask that the agricultural community work with us in trying to establish more effective consolidation points and drive those out so that we have a better overall alignment to the needs of customers in this area, which is sort of shown on the left-hand side. And we would like to respond to growth in this area. We are under a lot of pressure from the presidency to put forward a strategy going forward that is aligned to a few things. One of them is to growth and job creation. The second thing is to be much more effective in supporting the SA economy. So it shouldn't just be jobs and growth within Transnet, which are already constrained. It should be actually trying to maximize jobs and growth within the national economy. So we mustn't be a constraint. And in some parts of the export commodity area, we do remain a constraint. for certain mining products, and you could argue for certain agricultural products. We want to move towards trying to lift some of those constraints, so increase some of our capacity going forward, and improving our overall performance. And then very significantly, I think, is we understand, based on our financial position, that we won't have the full ambit of available debt funding to invest in all the requirements of trying to sustain our network of rail, port, and pipelines. We will have closely with the private sector, both to enhance our investment, but also to potentially enhance our operational efficiency and effectiveness. And that's where I'd like to leave it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for a very insightful presentation. We've already established a task team, and a number of our commodities are presented on that, or are present on that task team to engage with Transnet in terms of where we can come up with solutions in terms of transferring some of these commodities that are being exported from road to rail. But here's one particular question from Grain SA. It asks the following question: the grain elevators in Durban will be made deeper to accommodate bigger ships for grain exports and is scheduled for 2024 and 2025. Are we on track?
Would you like me to take the questions one at a time?
Okay, and then just another one. There are rumors that the railway to Botswana would damage. Is it going to influence exports to Botswana? And Pierre, if there's any question from your side?
No, not now. Let's listen to what Andrew has to say about those.
Okay. In respect of the first one, let me give you a sense of the program that we're busy with at Transnet as we speak. So we are engaging very closely with government, and we're engaging very closely with some of our key commodity exporters and stakeholders, very much the same as yourself, but in other areas. And the focus there is to redesign and tweak the operating model around Transnet to be much more effective. Part of what we have to do in doing that is make sure that we have an asset base that is fit for purpose, that doesn't fail and let us down from a performance perspective. And we need to make sure we invest behind that in all the correct places. We are constrained by the amount of funding that we have. So we are busy with an exercise now, which we call our segment-focused strategy. And our focus there is to relook at all the investment programs across Transnet going forward. As you know, and as many businesses across South Africa have experienced, is that COVID and the post-COVID world are going to be very different. The expectation is that GDP will be muted, rely on going to be challenged. So we are looking at all investments, including the Durban grain elevator expansion program. What we are identifying is that there are opportunities for us to co-invest in certain infrastructure going forward. I can't talk to the elevator because I haven't seen the analysis that we ourselves have done around that. Excuse me, but we want to make sure that we've got the right assets fit for purpose. So we will be kind of focusing on what we can fund, who else can work with us to fund it, what will we take out to market. And in that process, we will revisit some of the proposed for the Port of Durban. In respect of the railway to Botswana, I don't know the detail of that, so I'll have to come back to you on where that stands. There is a team within TFR that is focused very much on performance enhancements that has been put in place, and we already see the benefits of that across the network. I'm hoping that they would have focused on this line. I know that some of the line into Botswana deals with soda ash, etc., and we hope to get that back on stream as soon as possible. I don't have any immediate feedback on that particular product or any of the Botswana products, unfortunately.
Thank you. Andrew, we have come now to the end of our session, and I'm going to ask our president just to extend a word of appreciation to you and Transnet in particular. Pierre?
Andrew, thank you very much. You know, it's insightful when you see somebody else's business model and to see what can be done and what's possible and what's not possible. It shows that collaboration between agriculture and Transnet is something that must be a priority to be able to be as efficient as possible and also allow you to have a profitable business on your side. We think that exports and trade in Africa is going to expand much more, to our neighboring countries and so on. And the challenges we have currently, for instance, transport and logistics to the north, with road by road, makes it very difficult, especially if you get to Kasane and you get to the river and you see what happens to the truck standing to be able to deliver product to Zimbabwe and Zambia and up north, compared and product coming back from there to South Africa, to be able to have a more integrated economic system for Southern Africa. But I can see that what you are doing should provide results for us in the near future, around to 2024. I think Agri-SA must, from our side, we will collaborate with you and see whether we can make a contribution towards this whole issue to make it more cost-effective for farmers and more profitable for yourselves to be able to have a sustainable business. From my side, thank you very much for being open with us and talking about the logistics and where Transnet fits into it and what is rail, what should be on rail and what should be on road, so that the planning can be done in a sensible manner. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Pierre, and thank you also from our side for giving us the opportunity. We're very grateful for that. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We are heading towards the end of our day one of the Congress, but first we have an advert, and then after that we will welcome our new corporate members. Dames en heren, gee ons nog so 'n paar minute en dan is ons klaar met die dag 1 se program, maar waar ons graag net aan u wil bekendstel, ons nuwe korporatiewe lede.